You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is brought to you with the support of XDEEP and our amazing patrons, which makes everything you're about to listen to possible. I want to start by saying hi to the team at XDEEP. The COVID pandemic has been really tough on the dive industry, and I want to wish them all the best for a successful reopening. Also, huge thanks to our patrons at all levels and a massive shout out to our VIP patrons. My friend and guest in episode 42, from Dive Against Depression, Chris Dawson, Mate, I'll Dive With You Soon, Dan Bonehill, Luke Brock, and Matt Rivet from the UK, Dustin Humphrey, or Dusty Guns, who runs a veterans adventure group in the US, my students Kay and Michael Evans in New Zealand, Sean Weller in South Africa, and a special shout out to Matteo Burden. Awesome that you've recovered, mate. If you love Speaking Sidemount and would like to know more about how you can support the show by becoming a patron, go to www.patreon.com/speakingsidemount. I'll leave a link in the podcast notes. It only costs a few dollars per month to join our community, and there is some really cool bonus content and premium episodes available, and your support really does make a massive difference to the show. Lastly, this month's VIP Patron of the Month and my guest on this episode is Brendon Allen. Brendon is based and works as a commercial pilot in the UAE, but he is also a passionate diver and instructor, and through his business, Desert Reef Dive Systems, he is bringing top-shelf sidemount recreational and technical dive training to the region. He's a RAID Instructor Trainer and is passionate about the future of sidemount diving. We've been discussing this very subject for some months, and that is, how can we improve the standard of both instruction and diving in sidemount? In this episode, Brendon and I freewheel a bunch of ideas and share our thoughts on this, looking not only to address the issues, but to come up with some solutions that might help to fix sidemount. All this and much more in this episode of Speaking Sidemount. Hey Brendon, welcome to Speaking Sidemount, and a special thanks to you, mate, as our first VIP Patron of the month.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome, Steve. Lovely to chat with you.
Thanks again. Now, you and I have been talking quite a bit over the last few months, almost weekly at least, on Facebook Messenger and so on. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into diving?
Yeah, I started diving. We moved next to the coast when I was just finishing my final year of school in the early 90s, and I started free diving for lobster and spearfishing and that sort of thing there. A couple of years later, I joined the Air Force, and when I did my Air Force instructor's course, one of my colleagues was actually a scuba instructor, and finances had never allowed scuba diving before that, but he gave us a freebie course. So I certified as an open water Maui diver in 2000. Dived a little bit from there, but 2004, I had quite a bit of leave due to me from UN deployments. So I took some money and came back to South Africa, and I did my zero to hero over about 6 months. I did my advance through to my open water instructor in Maui in Cape Town. Fast forward a few years, did a bit of training, bit of instruction, not terribly much. It was always a sort of sideline hobby thing. And then I came out to the UAE to teach the airline cadets here to fly. Took the wife on a holiday to the Maldives and just fell in love with diving again. I'd always had a passion for diving rebreathers, and then discovered the concept of a recreational rebreather, started diving that, and then just got back into it. Problem was that my wife's had some back issues, recurring back issues for most of her life since she was quite young, and the weight of the tank for diving just became an insurmountable issue crossing beaches. Right. So I enrolled her on a sidemount course, and she wanted me to keep her company, so I enrolled as well. I'd just become a UTD instructor, so I enrolled on the sidemount course with the Z system. She fell in love with diving, and it just changed the way I looked at diving completely. Since then, I have, in about 1,000 dives, I think maybe I've done 3 or 4 single back mount dives when I've absolutely had to.
Right. Yeah, I think once you get into Sidemount and you start to understand the concept of having the redundancy and just the balance and everything it gives you, it's really hard to go back, isn't it?
That's the thing. And for me, something similar that we have with flying, if you fly a multi-crew aircraft as an instructor, your student isn't qualified to really help you. So you end up solo flying even pretty big airplanes. And with the diving, when I dive with open water students, taking people on their first deep dive, I can't necessarily rely on the students to, on open water one, if I have a failure, help me. So for many intents and purposes, I'm kind of solo diving.
Yeah.
So having the side mount and not worrying about telling the student, don't worry about me, you're not going to worry about me coming to you for gas or anything like that. You just deal with your situation and don't worry about me, really makes teaching life a lot simpler in a lot of ways.
Yeah, agree. And just one thing to unpack there. So you mentioned that you trained with UTD and the Z system, and the Z system copped a fair bit of flack on most of the Facebook forums. I've seen one, but I've never used one. How did you find it?
I'm very acutely aware of that I don't know what I don't know. And there seems to be a lot of very, very, very respected cave divers who are very vehemently against the use of the Z system in cave diving.
Mm-hmm.
For the recreational open water technical type diving that I've done, I haven't experienced those issues. I do think you're basically turning a side mount set into a side-mounted set of manifolded doubles.
Yes.
So you do still have that manifold failure point the same as you would have in a twin set. But that being said, the recreational use of it, for example, my wife, she started diving to be able to spend more time with me when I was doing my hobby. So she's not a diver per se. And for her, she had just gotten comfortable with the single back mount with a primary donate, and her regs were set up the way she liked it. And the idea of sitting and messing around with tanks and switching regs during the dive and all that sort of stuff it put her off a bit. So having a system where I could tell her the only difference is we're clipping the tanks to your sides. You're handling the rig exactly the same as you always would. Everything else is identical. You don't need to learn new muscle memory, etc. It's always donate what's out of your mouth, etc. For her, I don't know that I could have gotten her into independent side mount diving, but the Z system worked really well for her. I think there is a big use case for it, but I don't know enough to know the ins and outs for, long technical penetration dives, etc. I haven't done any of that with the Z system. So there's a couple of interesting little bits. For example, conventionally, if you're doing a tech side mount dive, and your buddy loses one of their deco gases, conventionally you would sit and say, I'm going to either buddy breathe, which I absolutely hate. You're either buddy breathing or somebody sitting, finishing their deco, and then the other one is, it's an awkward solution. With the Z system, you can share any gas you're carrying on you. So if I'm on my deco gas and suddenly your 50% fails, if you show me an out of gas, I hand you the reg that's in my mouth. I put my bungee back up in my mouth and we're all breathing the same suitable gas. Mm-hmm. So there are a couple of places where it's kind of nice, but I don't know that overcomes all the issues that everybody else has with it. I don't push for it at all. And all my diving now is independent because my agencies that I teach for now are all independent side mount. But I still do every now and then whip out the old manifold and go for a fun dive. Just super nice for diving. Side mount with a full face mask is a beautiful thing with the Z system because you never need to change regs out of your mouth. Right. So for super cold water and stuff like that, and I can see the appeal.
Yeah, and I think like anything, there's no 100% out there, is there? It's got its advantages and disadvantages, and you've just got to understand what the disadvantages are, and then if they overwhelm the advantages, then obviously you might not want to use it. But as you say, in certain circumstances, it might be the right thing to do. I can definitely get it with a full face mask. And I do understand how somebody who might not want to take side mount to a technical level and don't want to go through the process of switching rigs, I can see how that might be an advantage as well. But what you lose on the other side, firstly, you're adding in failure points. And then secondly, you're losing that advantage of truly independent gas supplies, which again is a double-edged sword in itself too. So thanks for sharing. I've seen all the negative press and I've understood that and I've agreed with it. But at the same time, I don't like to be too negative about things when I haven't tried them myself. And I certainly haven't tried that system. And so you mentioned how you got into Sidemount. So what are you doing with Sidemount diving now?
Well, at the moment, I'm a Sidemount instructor trainer, and the situation I'm sitting in now is I have this diving business similar to yours, except that this is not my primary income stream. And because the UAE has a limited amount of dive ops, I know all of the people there personally. To be a independent instructor without stepping on people's toes, because, I never want to take food off somebody's table. So what I decided to do was to specialize in the things that I look at around and I can't find being done properly, or there's just nobody offering it. So at the moment, to the best of my knowledge right now, there are 2 Sidemount instructor trainers in the country. And one is a freelance, really good guy by the name of Imad, and myself. There may be others, but I haven't run into any of them. I've seen a lot of absolutely terrible Sidemount around here. So for me to be able to advertise that and push for that, nobody's getting harmed by me going around and fixing stuff. There's also nobody to upset and offend, because you see a terrible open water diver, you don't want to step on too many toes and upset too many people.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, because I'm exactly in the same situation. Certainly diving is a big part of the businesses that I run, but it's not the only thing that I do. And I've decided to specialize for similar reasons. Well, firstly, because I love Sidemount and it's what I really wanted to do. But secondly, there wasn't really anybody doing it at the sort of level that I thought it could be done in New Zealand. And I've partnered with a dive shop here, Global Dive, who, in my opinion, are the best tech diving shop here. And they used to have a very good Sidemount diver instructor who's a cave explorer, Tom Crisp. Tom had moved away, though, so they really had a gap there that I could fill. And I sort of have deliberately not even gone into deco training for that reason too, because they do that. So what I am is I'm a stepping stone into the other courses that they do as well. So we're able to offer people the opportunity to either choose twin set diving and go down the intro to tech and then into deco training, or to choose Sidemount. And that way I then prepare them for that, both with fundamental and tech Sidemount training, and then hand them on to the guys at Global Dive, who I've also trained now in Sidemount. And so they can then carry on and do the deco training. So I'm happy because I'm doing what I want to do. And then they're happy because not only am I assisting them with equipment sales as well, but they're able to carry on with the training that they do. A lot of the guys through Global now are starting to look at cave diving. We had a great trip to Australia last year to Mount Gambier, and many of them came over, and a lot of them were Sidemount diving there as well. So it's really working well. And as you say, if you've got people who are professional instructors and that's what they do, or professional dive businesses, and they rely on that for their income, especially if they're your friends as well, you don't want to set yourself up in competition if you don't have to, right? So it's nice to have a little niche to specialize in.
Well, that's the thing, basically this industry, for a bunch of old reasons and really stupid reasons, has gotten it to the point where for profitability as a dive instructor, you either need to own a large sausage machine, the type that you see in Thailand and Utila and all of these other various places, or you need to be a highly specialized, where people are coming to you as instructor by name, the model that a lot of the people you've interviewed for that matter, Misha, all these folks, they need to position themselves where people are coming to them by name. If you do that, no man is an island. And in this industry with this current corona situation, the projections are not good. No. So we're not in a position to damage our brothers and sisters and ourselves at the moment, because it's going to be tough times for a lot of folks out there. So I personally feel beholden to try and help it, because the sun rises on all of us. And if the diving industry takes a nosedive, that's no bueno for me either.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that 100%. I think we're going to be diving local for quite some time. We love our international trips, no doubt, but there's just no question that international air travel is going to be very difficult, and borders are going to be closed or difficult to pass through. So we've really got to look at our local options and make sure that we support our local dive operators as part of that as well. So speaking of local, what's local for you? I've dived in the UAE, actually. I dived with Mark out at Fujairah a few years ago. This is our mutual friend, Mark Trotter. What are the dive sites that you have there?
Basically, we've got the west and the east coast. So Fujairah, you've dived, that's on the east coast. It's pretty tropical, lots of pretty corals and fish. The west coast off Dubai has some really impressive wrecks. There's some quite interesting stuff out there, but the water visibility is terrible. That's the actual Arabian Gulf. So the visibility is, they're not fun dives to take tourists on, etc. You know, you really want to be going there for something specific. We got some beautiful wrecks, but if you're not in love with rust, there's not an awful lot to do off Dubai. The East Coast, what's opened up a lot recently, well, before this current situation, is the northern tip up towards the Strait of Hormuz is called Musandam, which is part of territorial Oman. And they operate liveaboard boats, the traditional Arab dhows, for 2 and 3 day trips and week-long trips up that way. And what's kind of interesting there is you have pretty close to being wall dives, because the mountains just run straight into the ocean and they run down to debris slopes. So the diving there is, there's a lot of pelagic stuff that comes through, big currents. The last couple of times I dived there, we had cleaning stations for mola. Wow. I spent 25 minutes at 40 meters, about a meter from a juvenile mola that was getting cleaned. By juvenile, I mean only twice my size. He didn't really care that I was there, and I just sat there staring at him getting cleaned for 20 minutes. Awesome dive. We get the whale sharks coming through. There's a lot of very sporty currents when you go further north, but big currents brings big fish.
Yes.
Guys have dived there and seen greater hammerhead shoals. You know, they'll hook in with a reef line and hang out in the current like you would do in Galapagos. And they've just watched 200-300 greater hammerheads just cruising past, not a care in the world.
Sounds amazing.
There's some pretty epic diving, and it's very cost effective. I mean, a 3-day trip, including 5 or 6 dives, liveaboard, all told, is going to run you about $350 for basically a long weekend getaway. It's pretty cool. Once the dust settles on this, we'll be starting to organize trips for folks to come out and, you know, go and explore there and expose them to all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So you run Desert Reef Dive Systems. Tell us a bit about your dive center. You mentioned specializing in Sidemount, but what else do you do?
Again, it comes down to trying to find a niche. There's no shortage anywhere of folks go, hey, I'd like to scuba dive. They find something on Groupon. They go, they do a weekend course, do their open water. The dive centers here are all pretty good. You know, they're getting decent recreational instruction levels, but there's no custom bespoke sort of training. So what I'm finding a lot of is, you know, I'll get divers coming to me after a dive because, like you spoke about the other day, I'll hang off the side of the line at the safety stop, just chilling out, and you'll have this cluster of divers all hanging onto the ascent line. And usually somebody will come to me and go, how can I learn to dive like that? So, well, you know, you've started by talking to the right guy. We can find folks, we can help you out. And then people here, because of the nature of the beast, you know, there's higher disposable incomes generally, but everybody here travels a lot because they're all expats working here. So I have a student who, for example, he spoke to me, he wants to go and dive the cenotes. So that's his long-term goal. He's an advanced open water diver, but in the next 2-3 years, he wants to go dive cenotes and he wants to go dive Chip Lagoon. Aussie chap. So we've worked out a training progression for him, got him onto Sidemount. He's now diving recreational Sidemount, going to be doing his first deco courses in a little while, rec courses. I'm going to try and send him to Roger Williams to go and do his training there. Basically, somebody coming and saying, I know what I'd like to do, but there's so much misinformation, disinformation, or just lack of information about the best, simplest way to get to where I want to get to. And then everybody just tries to sell you courses. So, you know, somebody, you're going to dive Chip Lagoon. You have to do a limited visibility and night speciality to get your card. Really? Do you think somebody's going to ask you for a limited visibility card in Chip Lagoon? Why don't we just go and do a shore dive off Dubai on a day when the visibility is about 8 inches, and I'll teach you everything you need to know about limited visibility, and you don't need a card for that. So everybody's trying to push cards, and I get it. You know, there's certain numbers count, and they want to get their MSDTs, and they want to do this and stuff. But, you know, people don't get unbiased information, and I have my biases, but I do my level best to try and tell people, listen, I might send you to someone else. I will tell you what I would do in your position and give you options. If you decide to go with me, that'll be awesome. But I try to be as honest and transparent within what they can understand of the systems. And I take the chance that they might decide to go with someone else because somebody says to me, hey, I'd like to do rec penetration in Sidemount. what should I do? My answer to them is, honestly, if you've got the money and you've got the time, go to Philippines, go to Andy Davis. If you want to do a Sidemount course and learn to penetrate wrecks, he's your guy. And if they go there, that helps the industry. I don't get any money from them, but what goes around comes around.
Yeah, exactly. And I think having that philosophy, I noticed on your website too, you mentioned about class numbers, and that's always been a big deal for me from my experience in Gozo, where, we really seriously limited class sizes, and we were often doing one-on-one training or one-on-two. And then the greatest number we'd tend to have would be 3, sometimes 4, but you really were able to concentrate on the diver and give them the attention that they needed. And when you've got large class sizes, you just simply can't do that. So, that would be the first thing that I'd mention. Then the second thing is, as you say, it's all about helping them become a better diver. So by asking the right question up front, which is, where do you want to take your diving? What do you want to do? Then you can then create a plan for them and say, well, look, based on what I know and my experience, this is what you should do. And as you say, it might be with you, but it might not.
Mentoring, it's fine. One-on-one's fine. Actual classes, 2 and 1 is an optimal thing. But I see people doing DSDs. You have 2 arms and you're doing 4 students. What on earth? Some of the ratio stuff. And I get it. The fact is, it's not going to change. We can complain as much as we can. But I think a lot of it, which will segue back into the Sidemount in a second, but a lot of it is the students don't know anything about what it should look like until much further down the line. Yeah. So the number of stories of folks going, girl walks straight out of their open water class, and you say, how was your class? And they go, oh, that was awesome. My instructor was great and I had a wonderful time. Fast forward 4 courses later and you say, so how do you feel about your open water class? And they're all, oh man, we didn't do this and they broke these standards. The fact that they don't know what it's supposed to look like. Yeah. And I think that's what we're getting a lot with the Sidemount is the students, potential students, don't know what a good Sidemount instructor looks like in terms of personality, attitude, approach, abilities, technical abilities. And they go and say, oh, the Sidemount thing looks like fun. I'd love to dive. And they don't know what they're supposed to be getting. And they can be shortchanged just purely by ignorance, by the most well-meaning instructor in the world. But they don't know what they don't know. And then, unfortunately, they go and put a photograph of them in Sidemount, a beautiful picture that they took, of them having a wonderful wildlife interaction. And their tanks are 3 inches high and something's dangling somewhere. And then the entire internet Sidemount community rips them a new one, tears them apart. Yeah. And they're going, but it was a pretty turtle. I don't understand. And that social media environment is so toxic at the moment. It's absolutely crazy. And we're not adding context. We're not helping. For example, I have a beautiful photo that got taken. I was guiding a dive for a scuba board mate of mine who came out, and we ended up in a really shallow bit of water. It's about 4 meters off a reef. And the bottom is all hard corals and very fragile acropora tables. So what I did was I took my tank attachment points, the lower points, and at the time I wasn't using sliding rings. I was using 2D rings aside. And I moved the tanks to the top one, even though they were almost empty. And the reason was I wanted to get really close to look for the little acropora crabs inside the corals. So I made a decision to let my tank butts fly high because I didn't want to bang the coral. I wanted to be able to get really, really close and not have a tank breaking bits of coral where I couldn't see it. And he took a photograph of me with a pair of mating cuttlefish, me watching them 2 feet away. It's a beautiful picture. The guy's an amazing photographer. I can't put that up on social media. No. Because regardless of context, I made a situational choice to do that. I could have had my tanks perfectly level and flat, but I chose to get the tank bottoms out of the way of the reef. I look at that picture, but there's no way I can ever show anybody because nobody wants to hear context. If I ever put that up, I would be painted as the world's worst Sidemount instructor. You call yourself a Sidemount instructor and say, what's the problem? If I was diving a cenote where the roof was an issue and I decided to move my tanks lower than usual to avoid bumping the roof inadvertently, what would be the problem? But everybody rips everybody. And the students come and they go, hey, I want to try side mounting. Let me do some research. They go to the Facebook page and they come away from that going, I don't need to get training. I don't need to even stick my head into this. I'm just going to teach myself to side mount because I don't even want to deal with all of this. And we just aren't doing ourselves any favors.
Yeah, look, there's so much to unpack in what you've just said there. And let's start with the Facebook situation. You're right. I mean, there's such a toxic environment. And I mean, we're seeing some of the worst of it at the moment with the COVID-19 situation, where obviously there's people with different political affiliations or ways of thinking and so many different perspectives and misinformation coming up. Social media is such an amazing thing, but it has a really dark side to it as well. What's happened in Sidemount, if we sort of unpack it historically, is we had some really, really good divers who took Sidemount and started to use it in caves. You know, let's think way back to the 50s and 60s with the cave diving group in the UK, and then it went to Florida and so on. And the guys who were really using it were the cutting edge explorers because they needed the configuration for it. And these were phenomenal divers in most cases. And then what's happened is people have seen that, and the agencies have jumped on board, and there's been this side mount wave. And look, I'm part of that. I was on in the earlier times of it, but I was certainly part of the side mount wave where we saw Steve Bogart, Steve Martin, these sort of guys out there who were very, very good at publicizing it as well and putting video out showing what it should be. And so side mount started to grow, and a lot of people wanted to take on this configuration for a variety of different reasons. And what happened was, because the requirements to become an instructor was so low, you could be an open water instructor and do the side mount specialty, and then you're a side mount specialty instructor. It's as simple as that. So you really have no experience other than your own course to go by. And you're also the victim of what you were taught. So if you were taught well, then that's one thing. But if you weren't taught well, then you only know what you know. And that persisted, I think, for many years, and perhaps still persists today. But what I would like to say is, I think there is a lot of material out there now on what good side mount diving is. And the things that have come across my path, for instance, is that there is quite a lot of video content on YouTube now with good side mount divers. I put a lot up myself, but I leaned heavily on Steve Martin in my early days, and the likes of Tom Steiner and Audrey Cadell, who were my mentors, if you like. And once I understood what good side mount diving was, it was pretty easy to find the people who really knew what they were doing and were able to train you. So I wonder today, with the amount of information out there, how is it that some people are not seeing this now and are still going through courses that we would call substandard? How is that happening?
I think what you've hit on there is, you said the line, when I realized what side mount diving could be, then I. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's, to a certain extent, the missing step. We're all looking at side mount. All of the folks that you talk to, the big name side mount folks, they're all coming to it from a technical wreck penetration or overhead cave environment.
Yes.
And to try and put yourself in the mindset of the recreational side mount diver who has probably no interest in ever going into an overhead. I'm that classic story. I'm looking forward to doing some cave training, but I didn't get into it because I wanted to go into tiny spaces where I could only go in with side mount. So for me, I did my side mount course. It was okay. It was very short. And I then had to sort of self-teach a lot of stuff. For my wife, as an example, or some of my students, they're doing it because the guy's got dodgy knees and he can't carry a twin set down to the beach. There's just no chance that's happening. He has to carry his tanks one at a time. He's not going to go into a cave. He's got no interest. So how does he get motivated to find perfect side mount? At what point do we let him realize that it is important? Let's say we got Bob in Bali, the hypothetical side mount instructor. Bob likes side mount. He works for a dive shop, for a sausage machine. He works 6 days a week. He has 1 day off. On that day off, he goes for the fun dive that he can afford. And he's using a cobbled together side mount rig because he earns peanuts as a dive instructor. And he has self-taught himself side mount, and he's done 25 dives in what Chris Richardson calls independent front mounted doubles. And
like it.
He's passionate about side mount. He loves the idea and he's enjoying the benefits, because the thing is, the 7 benefits you talk about, a lot of those you get, even if your side mount is truly shoddy,
yes.
A lot of them you still get. So even bad side mount for a lot of folks is way better than the back mount they're used to. He goes, he dives, he looks at an internet article and he reads up a little bit. But the fact is, even if he wanted to, he's a self-certified instructor because after his 25 dives, he's an MSDT, he can go and self-certify as a side mount instructor. And now he's sitting there. He's the only side mount instructor at the shop. It's the only niche he's got. It's the only security he has against getting let go when the business drops off, because he's one of 60 open water instructors there. And he's teaching the best he can. I don't believe in attributing to malice when ignorance is on the table.
Yeah.
And he does the best he can. But if he goes onto a forum and he posts on Facebook, hey, look, I just taught a side mount student, he's not getting a, hey, buddy, let me send you a private message and I notice you're doing this. Maybe I can help you. He's not getting any of that. He's just getting himself ripped a new one. How does that guy earning a couple of $100 a month, how does he get world-class training? How does he go to see Andy, to see you, to go and see, Steve Lewis? How does he do that? Because I can bring you out to teach me, but it costs me money.
Sure.
And if you're sitting with somebody who's working for tip money for beers, he wants to be a good side mount instructor, but how does he get there? And that's what and you and a couple of folks are working on.
Let's put our hats on. Let's put our Sidemount Education Association hats on for a moment. And just for everyone's benefit, Brendon took the initiative to set up this Facebook page and has invited a few of what we'd consider the top instructors in the world. There's quite a few missing too, but there's a few on there, which I think is good.
If they're Facebook friends of yours, add them, buddy.
I will. And look, I don't know if they'll participate, but that doesn't really matter. That's not really the most important thing. I think the most important thing is that we've got this agenda of trying to improve side mount instruction in general. And so if we were to say, how could we help those sort of guys? I think, look, a few things that I've been trying to do with Speaking Side Mount. So this is me speaking from my own point of view. The reason Speaking Side Mount exists is to try and educate divers about what is good side mount. How do you find it? How do you know it when you see it? And let's talk about some of the aspects of it. And there's several episodes out there that I've done where I've spoken about that personally, but also I'm generally asking my guests those sort of questions as well. So this is an opportunity. Obviously, audio is not necessarily the best way to learn, but at least you can get perspectives from that. I think the other thing, I've mentioned Steve Martin's videos a few times. I mean, if you're remote and you can't possibly get good side mount instruction, investing in those videos could be one of the best things you could do. It's a complete from soup to nuts on everything you want to know about side mount. He teaches a very specific way, Steve Martin. It just happens to be the same way that I do because we come from the same sort of roots. But in terms of video and learning remotely, it's one of the best ways that you could do that. Now, is it the best way to learn overall? I'm not so sure. I think combining those videos with really good instruction would be better face-to-face. But as you say, if you can't afford to travel or there's nobody close to you, then that would be a way to do it. One of the reasons I set up my Patreon as well for Speaking Side Mount is so that I could build a community so that for a very, very low cost, people could join that and get additional information over and above what we're doing. We're doing videos now, we're doing live sessions. So that's another angle that I'm trying to do in my contribution to this. I mean, you must have some other ideas yourself as well.
Yeah, and what you're doing is really helpful. And it's definitely my colleague Turk here. He's working his way up. He's just become a side mount instructor. I did finish his course about 3 months ago. He's been listening to your podcast from day one. There's a lot of folks, conscientious folks, who are using every resource they have available, of which Speaking Side Mount is a pretty large one. Obviously, from a technical point of view, there's bits and pieces about configurations and stuff that come up. But really, I think the benefit from your podcast for us has just been seeing how other folks are doing things and how they are approaching it and their mindsets, because that kind of gives us a sanity check, because we're all living in a bubble. You're the only side mount instructor in 1,000 nautical miles. I'm the only guy here, blah, blah. So you never know if you're thinking the right way, because if you're not exposed to other folks, you live in your little echo chamber, which is a problem politically, globally, and every other way. The kernel that I have in my mind of what I think might help, and this is why I started the Facebook page to discuss it with people that know more than I do and have better ideas than I do, is I would like there to be a resource where folks can, if they want to do side mount training and be better side mount instructors, that they have a resource to A, know what that looks like, and B, have some folks that can help them out and then in turn help out the industry. Mm-hmm. So for example, let's say you had an accreditation association. One of the first things I would say is there needs to be a code of conduct. We cannot allow side mount instruction to devolve into the new DIR wars.
Yes.
We can't let that happen for the industry. So I have decided for myself that I will never say negative things to people about side mount diving online in any public way at all. If I see a bad side mount video, I try to find the person that did it and speak to them privately, if it's a Facebook Messenger, or I try to help them get better, not berate them for not being better. That may or may not be their fault in any way or shape or size. If we had a group of people that are acknowledged experts in this environment and who are a respected authority figure, authority is not the right word, but people that their word carries some weight. The Steve Lewis's, the Andy Davis's, yourself, Roger, a bunch of folks. And if we said, okay, what we're going to do is we are going to do everything we can to make side mount more inclusive, friendlier, and make it that it's less toxic, and give the instructors resources that they can use. So if we have a SEA accredited instructor, so when somebody's looking for a side mount instructor, they can go on a website and look down and see. And what that's saying is this list of folks have approached us. They've agreed to a code of conduct. They've agreed to a way of dealing with things. And we believe that they are doing a decent job of side mount training. And what's more important to me is that they have the inclination and the desire to be better.
Yeah.
That, hey, if you want absolutely incredible side mount CCR training, obviously you want to go to Ed Sorensen. But if you're living somewhere else, here's guys that Ed's trained. Here's guys that have dived often with Ed. So if you can't get to Ed, this list of folks, they're the next best thing.
And you're raising a really good point there, because obviously this experienced upper echelon, right, of, in some ways we might say, of aging divers. No disrespect.
Well, that's the other problem.
Yeah, Ed's roughly my age, right? But we're not the young guys anymore. And Brian Kaycock's in this group as well. The level of experience and expertise in these guys is immense. However, they've passed that experience on. It's the same with me. I train with Tom Steiner. So I carry some of Tom Steiner with me. I've trained with Ed Sorensen. I've been fortunate enough, and I've had the resources to be able to go and train with these guys. Why would you come to me? Well, partly it's because I've made the investment in my diving to build myself, to get the training from the right people, but then to work on that and to work on myself. Because it's one thing to receive training. It's another thing then to consistently put it in the water and do something with it. You need to be that way. And so let's look at it from the first point of view is, as a side mount instructor, have you taken a decent course in training yourself? Did you train with a Tom Steiner, an Ed Sorensen, Brian Kaycock, Gary Dallas, Steve Martin? There's just so many. Have you taken some good base training, and then have you gone on and bedded that in? I remember myself, I was a dive master when I took my side mount course and did my initial cave training. I got a very good course, but I've mentioned this a few times. I then had to take my freshwater aluminum cylinder diving 24 Celsius in the cenotes and caves of Mexico. Then had to take that all the way over to Monterey, California, and dive in cold water in a dry suit with steel cylinders and nobody around to help me. And it took me a long time. When I say a long time, it probably took 18 months or more to bed that in myself and figure out what the hell I had to do to be able to get that right. Now, things are better now. There's much more information out there. But what I was doing is I was sort of learning as I was going and building my own experience as a diver at that point. I wasn't even an instructor then. It is important, I think, that before you become an instructor in side mount, that not only have you had good training, but you've then gone out and put some dives in the water, because side mount is a bit fiddly. It is a bit different. It does take some time to streamline your gear. It does take some investment in equipment and getting the right length of hoses, or at least if you don't have the right length, knowing how to stow it properly so that you can be streamlined and that you can have everything squared away, as I call it. That's sort of where I'm coming from there, is the prerequisite to even be an instructor should be, in my opinion, having taken a good course of instruction, let's say it from somebody who's accredited with the SEA, I like the C part of that, and then you've gone and give
credit to Turk. That was his acronym building.
I like it. And then you've gone and built on that, and you've put 25 dives or 50 dives on it or something like that. And then you can say, okay, well, hey, now I want to teach this. One suggestion I put on there is, if you want to then become an instructor, you have to go and visit an instructor trainer and do some instruction course. This is how you teach Sidemount on top of diving. And that's sort of what I did when I went to Gozo, because I'd been diving Sidemount for a long time. But boy, I learned a lot really fast by spending 2 seasons there and hanging out with, not only Tom Steiner and Audrey, but all of the people who came through there. We had some phenomenal divers as our customers who you'd get to dive with every day, and you learn from everybody.
That's a perfect storm.
Yeah, it is. It is. When you can get around a place like that, and let's hope we can travel again soon, because I know you had a trip to Malta planned this year. Gozo's an amazing place to go and dive, and some of my friends are there who are doing it pretty tough at the moment with no dive business at all, as many of us are around the world. So I'd highly recommend, certainly Audrey and Tom in particular, who have both been guests on Speaking Sidemount before, and currently doing it a little tough because of the situation in Malta.
Yeah.
Well, situation globally and not just Malta. Is there more you want to say on that?
Well, the one thing you touched on there, if I had the power to step back in time and redo how Sidemount's been approached by agencies and divers and everything over the last, let's call it 10 years, I agree 100% with what you've said. I would do what they've done with rebreathers, is keep the instructor trainer pool small so you can have decent quality control, and then keep the standards high so that becoming a Sidemount instructor is an element of pride. It shouldn't be particularly easy to get that card. The problem is that we're not going to get to that situation. There's no industry drivers before this whole corona situation, and there definitely won't be in the next couple of years while everybody tries to recover, because money talks, and if there's no money, nobody dives, nobody has a business, nobody has a living. The self-certified borderline, it's really hard for a Sidemount instructor trainer now to turn away a student. If I have somebody coming now, it becomes financially really difficult to turn people away. And when you have the ability to self-certify, that becomes even harder. We need to accept the reality that we have at the moment and see what we can do, because Sidemount doesn't require a card. And I've never been asked for a Sidemount card for any dive I've ever done.
Yep.
And nobody that I know has ever been asked for one. Tech instruction, we have that situation in place. Everybody, you need a card to go to this depth and use this gas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But while you don't really need a card to go and do a Sidemount dive, we will never get away from the people doing it without any training and people doing it with substandard training, et cetera.
Yep.
So our job is to educate folks into why you want to do it properly, and then give the folks the resources to say, hey, if you don't have a Sidemount instructor with their salt within 1,000 miles of you, and you're determined to do it without training, without official training, let's give you some resources that you can do that. Let's not let perfect be the enemy of good enough. If you have somebody who sits there going, well, I'll never be accepted as a Sidemount instructor unless I dive like A, B, and C, I'm never going to be able to get there. They just switch off and don't bother, and they carry on merrily on their own way. And we're not ever going to have, let's say, the same drivers to get good training that you do on CCR, because honestly, even bad Sidemount isn't going to kill you. Most people honestly can train themselves to dive Sidemount safely without an instructor. And that is a reality. So we need to work within that and see what we can do to help people get better without making the hurdles too big.
I can shoot down the argument I'm about to make, but I'll make the argument anyhow and see whether that holds any water. The thing is, why is Sidemount a specialty? Twin set isn't a specialty. Yes. So why is Sidemount a specialty? It's an equipment configuration that is incorporating a redundant gas supply, multiple cylinders, multiple regulators, and first stages, second stages. It's identical to a twin set in that respect. And so twin set isn't a specialty. Why is Sidemount? What it should be is it should be a stepping stone to another type of diving for you. And I'm going to shoot it down from the point of view that, hey, we want to make this available to recreational divers for the reasons that you spoke about before. But maybe I'm wrong, but I kind of feel as if that's the smaller group as opposed to the people who really want to use it for the redundant gas supplies. I'm carrying more gas. Now I can take this into overhead environments. I can take it to deeper depths. That's how I see Sidemount. And so from that point of view, it's an equipment configuration and it's a stepping stone towards going into environments that you need redundant gas supplies and so on. And therefore, it should be treated the same way as a twin set. And to dive a twin set in the TDI world, you do the Intro to Tech course. That teaches you the technical equipment and the mindset and some of the processes that you need for starting to move into that type of diving where you need redundant gas supplies. And I think this is fundamentally why we're in this situation, is because it got made a specialty when it really shouldn't have been.
No, I think you're 100% correct. I mean, that being said, I know a lot of people diving twin sets recreationally with no certified official training on it. The thing is, you can see bad side mount from a screen grab on a Facebook page. You can't see bad twin set diving like that. I think there are a lot of untrained twin set divers out there, more than we'd expect, but it's not as glaringly obvious. So there's that part of it. I think calling it a specialty is a two-edged sword. I think it's good for us, your sponsors, XDEEP. I'd be curious as to how many XDEEP harnesses they've sold to people that are actually using them in caves and overhead, and how many they've sold to people that are never going to be in an environment where they actually need side mount.
Right.
I would suspect, and again, the plural anecdote is not doubted, but in my experience, of all the side mount divers that I know personally, none of them are currently diving in a environment where side mount is actually required. I'd be kind of curious as to how many side mount courses are being done worldwide versus people that are actually going to caves. I think we might actually be in the minority, to be honest.
It's possible. I think it's very location specific as well. So, I mean, if you ask the same question in Mexico, I think you'd get a different answer if you asked it in Florida or Mount Gambier. So I think if you're in a cave diving or even wreck diving or technical diving kind of hotspot, there's caves in Gozo, but it's not really all about caves. They're not the same as Mexican caves or the caves of Europe or Florida for that matter. And yet there's side mount specialty, and Gozo Technical is a side mount specialist center. And that was really about the fact that they're a tech dive center, and it was a configuration that was suitable for that in whichever direction you want to take it. And I don't want what I said earlier to come across the wrong way, because I'm absolutely not against side mount being used recreationally. I dive recreationally and side mount all the time. I love it. And I think it should be open to there. All I'm saying is that the fact that we've pushed this equipment configuration and made it a specialty means that we now don't have, I believe, the same degree of rigor around the training on it that perhaps a twin set gets. Maybe, again, it's location-based, but I don't see that many people diving twin sets in this part of the world who haven't been through some training. That might just be idiosyncratic of where I am and where I've been. So not to the same degree as I see with side mount, that's for sure. But look, that's good. And I think we're trying to do the right thing. I mean, we're thinking about it. Actually, I read an article from Paul Toomer of RAID a few weeks ago, and I'll definitely get this wrong, but I think there was an analogy in there about cycling versus diving. And I think he was making a comparison with how big cycling is as a sport and how inclusive it is, and how, people tend to help each other. And if you're riding your bike incorrectly, you're not going to get shot down on Facebook for that. And I think what we've got to think about is, look, we're trying to grow diving. There should be more people diving than there are right now. And we definitely want to grow side mount as well, but we just want to do it in the right way. Safety is the most important thing, of course, but then following quickly behind that is making sure that you're set up properly so that you're efficient and that you're doing it correctly or doing it right, if I want to use those words. So I thought that was a good analogy, and perhaps we've got to get more of that mindset.
Optimally, maybe.
Exactly.
Paul's definitely been shaking the tree of the diving industry a lot. He's disrupting a lot of stuff in some very good ways. I think I remember reading that article as well. He expressed better how I'd been feeling, where he discussed, I believe it was at DEMA, if I remember correctly, where we've got to stop blasting other dive shops. We've got to stop bad-mouthing instructors and agencies, because we are harming the industries. And if somebody's doing something that's going to get somebody killed, sure, we have an obligation to do something about that. But there's ways to do it that don't involve going, oh, don't go to those guys, they're terrible. We're not doing ourselves any favors with that. He's also on that Facebook group, Side Mount Education. He and I have been chatting for a while now. And if there's an agency that's going to be in a position to redefine how we think about side mount training, specifically recreational, it's going to be RAID at the moment, because, the other agencies aren't as agile because they're older. There's more inertia. For example, Paddy, everybody loves to bash Paddy, but the fact is Paddy's the 800-pound gorilla. Yeah. For Paddy to change a significant standard, for them to turn around and say, you can't self-certify a side mount anymore. They've got a couple of thousand self-certified side mount instructors out there. What happens to them? There's a lot of stuff happening. Yeah. For RAID or any of the smaller, RAID's not smaller, but agencies like GUE, UTD, those agencies with small instructor numbers, they can make changes. RAID, can make changes. Some of the other agencies, it's a little tricky. And the fact is, Paul has an audience. Paul, when he talks, people are listening. He has the professional background to back it up. And he's also in the position that he's in. Again, it's a perfect storm. There's a whole bunch of new stuff happening. So I'm kind of excited there. I'm hoping that we can get some agency traction with SEA to try and get things better. Paul's the president of the Rebreather Training Council, which in a lot of ways is kind of what I see SEA as being at some point. It's not a compulsory organization, but it's an organization that's respected. And if they put their stamp on stuff, people at least know what they're getting.
Yep. I think there's a big opportunity for an agency to grab this, really grab it by the tail and do something with it. And as you say, it's just a matter of figuring out exactly what it is that needs to be done. If there was an agency that really took Sidemount and said, hey, listen, we're going to create something that's really going to set the right standards, the right levels for Sidemount, the right path to becoming a Sidemount diver, the right path to becoming a Sidemount instructor, such that the instructors working under that agency were producing consistently great standard Sidemount divers. I think there'd be a good opportunity there, because at the moment, for better or for worse, most agencies are fairly hands-off in terms of what you do. I know the TDI standards, for instance, and the SDI standards are very open, which is a positive thing in many circumstances, because it means the instructor can determine what goes into a particular course. But at the same time, it also leaves it open to, if the bare minimum is 1 confined water and 2 open water sessions, then what sort of course is that? It bears no relation to the sort of courses that I teach, that's for sure, but it's a cheap course.
We've got enough brain power between all of us that if we all see the problem, we own the problem, we, to a certain extent, are all part of the problem. We can do things. We can make positive changes without getting draconian and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that it's the same thing with the recreational rebreathers. We need more people diving Sidemount so that we can have a choice of gear, so that XDEEP can offer us all the wonderful gear that they offer us at a price we can afford. Because honestly, if the only people that dived Sidemount were people that actually needed Sidemount for restrictions, a Sidemount rig would cost you a couple of $1,000s, and we'd all be building them out of seatbelts and hydration bladders again.
Back to the old days, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, nobody needs that.
No, exactly. And that's a really fair comment. I remember when I first spoke to XDEEP about their sponsorship of Speaking Sidemount, they were super positive and have been great supporters and positive the whole way. But they would have been more positive about it if the podcast was more open to other fields in diving. So I chose to focus on the niche of Sidemount, but that's a weakness as well from their point of view, because they sell so much gear to twin set divers and to single cylinder back mounts and so many other types of equipment. So it did limit it from their point of view.
Stuff are pretty awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Sidemount, we've got to acknowledge it's a little niche of diving that thankfully, due to the global nature of the world, now we're able to talk about. But as you say, if it was just for cave diving or just for penetration wreck diving and that sort of thing, then there wouldn't be very many people doing it at all. We've got to acknowledge and I guess embrace the recreational open water Sidemount divers as well, and acknowledge that it's a great tool for that, for reasons other than passing restrictions. As you mentioned, if you've got issues carrying gear and so on, there's many other reasons that you might want to dive Sidemount than going through restrictions. Let's move on. So thanks for discussing that, because I think that was a cool discussion, and I think we at least unpacked some of the issues and started to talk a little bit about solutions, and I think that's really the way ahead, is solutions around that. As we said earlier, it looks like international travel is absolutely screwed for a while. I had my truck trip this year cancelled, and I know many other people have had trips overseas cancelled, and that's a problem for all of us. I guess I'd amplify again for everybody, let's dive local, let's support our local dive shops who are really doing it tough right now and do everything we can. One thing I'm doing while we're still in shutdown here, we're coming out a little bit next week, but we can't dive really significantly for another couple of weeks, as I'm going to get all of my gear serviced during that period. And I'm just praying that my dry suit comes back from Switzerland before the winter hits here. So it's only got a couple of months before I'm not really going to be able to wetsuit dive anymore. I'll have to reach out to SF Tech and see if I can get that back and see whether that's even possible. When international travel does open up again, what's the first destination that you're going to visit?
It was going to be Malta, because that was supposed to happen the first few weeks of May. That's obviously been moved along. But now, unfortunately, Roger Williams has been bored at home. So he's been posting pictures of the cenote diving that side. And he's now created a whole new problem for me. trying to arrange a trip to the Yucatan and split Yucatan Cozumel trip for some local folks here, and also Malta, and then Sweden, friends Poseidon. So it's going to kind of depend on time of the year. When they lift the travel restrictions, we'll see where's diveable and go. Hit some wrecks, hit some deeper dives, hit some recreational dives. So at the moment it's Malta and or Playa Yucatan, that area. But we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, well, let's hope it happens reasonably soon. I'm kind of thinking 2020 might be out of the question, but certainly as we focus some more on next year and as we start to move past this, let's hope 2021 turns out to be a better year for international travel. And in the meantime, let's dive the crap out of wherever we are. So, mate, thank you very, very much for joining me. It's been really great catching up. And one thing I do want to thank you for is you're one of the early patrons of Speaking Sidemount. So I really appreciate that. It makes a big difference to the podcast having people like yourself supporting it.
We need to pay this stuff forward.
Thank you, mate. Well, again, I hope we catch up soon, and stay safe, stay well, fly safe for you as well.
Likewise, and will do. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Hey, well, thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Speaking Sidemount. I really enjoyed the discussion I had with Brendon. We freewheeled a bunch of ideas. We went down some rabbit holes, but hopefully at the end of all of that, we came up with some ideas that might help to fix the current situation with Sidemount. Not that everything is doom and gloom. There's some fantastic Sidemount diving and instruction out there, but the objective really is just to see if we can find a way to improve the standard overall and help everyone become better Sidemount divers. Just a reminder, if you love Speaking Sidemount and would like to support the show by becoming a patron, please go to www.patreon.com/speakingsidemount. There you'll find all the information you need about the different tiers, the rewards that are available, the bonus content, the premium episodes, the live sessions. Please go and check it out. And if you're able to, I'd love you to come and support the show and join our patron community. Thanks very much, and I'll catch you in the next episode. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.